Welcome, everyone. It's so good to see so many folks here tonight. We also have a really nice presence online, too. I'm Anna Chow. I'm the director of the Center for Cross-Cultural Research here at Western, and we are co-hosting tonight's event in partnership with the Department of Psychology and Western's Foundation for Alumni and Family. We're really grateful to the Fraser Lecture Series for their support of tonight's event. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that the land on which we gather, and that I have been lucky to call my home for the past 10 years, is the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Lumi and Nooksack nations. As a research center within an educational institution, we have the responsibility and power to create culturally safe and appropriate environments of learning. I also acknowledge that the many freedoms and privileges we enjoy today are because of both historic and ongoing colonialism. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge that today marks the 1-year anniversary of the steep and devastating escalation of violence in the Middle East. While today's event was not planned to directly address those events, there is much to learn about cultural conflict and violence through the lens of the psychology of racism. The field of psychology has many things to offer in terms of understanding these and other complex issues. And there is an important role for more conversations, both here at Western and beyond. We need opportunities to learn, engage, and disagree with one another in order to grow. It's a great privilege to help organize amazing scholars from outside of Western to come visit us and share their knowledge with us. And so now I want to turn things over to one of the key organizers for tonight's event, Dr. Christy Scullin.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you all for being here. Some quick housekeeping items before we begin. If you're on Zoom, thanks for joining by Zoom. If you're on Zoom, please use the Q&A feature to submit questions. It should be at the bottom middle of your screen. We will have time for questions at the end, maybe the last 5 or 10 minutes, and Anna will come around with this microphone. So just raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, and we'll kind of take turns with questions in the room and on Zoom. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Stephen Othello Roberts. Dr. Roberts is an associate professor of psychology at Stanford University and former academic director of Stanford Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity. Dr. Roberts is trained as a developmental psychologist with a PhD from the University of Michigan. Although his work is much bigger and broader than psychology, I've been so impressed with how he synthesizes research from sociology, history, political science, and economics to identify the factors that contribute to racism. He's authored dozens of publications in top journals. I won't name them all, but they're amazing. And he's also won numerous awards. We don't have time this evening to list all of them, but I do have to share. He has won the American Psychological Society's Rising Star Award. And in addition to being a prolific researcher, Dr. Roberts has earned the Dean's Award for outstanding teaching at Stanford, and I think you'll see why. In addition to all of that, he is also a new dad and proud father to a 6-month-old baby boy. So we are so lucky to have him here today. Let's put our hands together for Dr. Stephen Othello Roberts.
Okay. Thank you all for being here. I want to start off with some gratitude, and I'm going to make some quick acknowledgments and some disclaimers. I would like to thank, of course, Christy, the Center for Cross-Cultural Research. I want to thank the Department of Psychology, any organization or entity that had any role in putting this together. I thank you, and this is literally one of the most beautiful canvases I've ever seen in my life. It was kind of like, whoa, I'm like in a magical world here. So I thank you for inviting me here, and I thank you all for taking the time to attend. I also want to echo the sentiment that although I'll be talking about race and racism in the context of the US, specifically in the context of white and Black Americans, that these are issues that cut across categories and across national boundaries, and I hope that you find something that is relevant across the very narrow space that I'm talking about today. And I want to give some disclaimers. As Christy mentioned, I'm the dad of a new little 6-month-old. So that means two things. First thing that means is that I just recently returned from a paternity leave. So I have not given a lecture in a while, so I'm a little rusty. So please forgive me as I kind of get back into my groove. And what that also means is that raise your hand if you're a parent. Yeah. Okay. You know about parent brain and 6-month-old. So if I just slip into incoherent rambling, just kind of let me do that for a while. But I'll try my best to be as coherent as possible. Do I have any other disclaimers? Can you hear me in the back? Everything? Okay. Okay. Oh, the last disclaimer that I wanted to give is if you are expecting to walk away from this talk believing that, you know what, I now know exactly how to talk to kids about race and racism across all contexts, across the universe, that is not going to happen. I hope that you walk away with some practical insights and tools, but as you'll see, it's a complicated issue, and I will, of course, not answer all of your questions, okay? I'm also noticing that some of my jokes are kind of bombing here already, but maybe we'll warm up as time goes on. Okay, so we're good. Okay. Okay. I also have a tendency to kind of just take my time in the beginning, and then toward the end, I'm like, oh my God, I have 1,000 more slides to get through. So I'm going to keep going. Oh, we're good. Okay. So I think that might be, no, you're good. Sweet. Thank you. Okay. So the topic is talking to children about race and racism. And I'd like to start by sharing the moment that I had my first conversation about racism. I remember it like it was yesterday. Okay. It was this adorable young child here. And this was, I was around 8 years old. And it was a cold, wintry day. It was actually spring, so it was a regular, very nice day. But it was a special day. It was my sister's birthday. And I wanted to buy my sister a birthday gift for her birthday. So I cracked open my piggy bank, I took out my change, and I didn't tell anyone, left the house, walked 3 blocks down to the convenience store to buy a gift for my sister. When I entered the store, I pretty quickly found the perfect gift. It was a very tiny rose-shaped candle. It's pretty cheap, and I thought, I'm going to buy this. I'm going to put it on my sister's birthday cake. So I put the candle in my left hand with my change in the right hand. I walked up to the register, ready to, make this purchase. I felt like a real grown-up. Should say, I think I mentioned this was in Germany. We were living in Germany, and before I got to the cashier looks at me and she says, "Erwischt," which means, "Hey, caught, got you." And she says, "What are you trying to do with what's in your hand right there?" And kind of not clear on what she was talking about, so I showed her my hand, and she basically said, "Hey, you're trying to steal that candle, and I caught you." And I'm trying to reason with her because I have the money in my hand, but she wasn't listening, and she eventually grabs me by the collar and pulls me toward her, and I look around, and no one's really engaging with me. It was a pretty terrifying experience. And she then she hands me a telephone, tells me to call home, call my parents. So I called my parents, call home. My dad answers the phone, and I was like, okay, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be in trouble here. So my dad picks me up, and we're marching home, heading home. And I'm like crying and begging, trying to get him to understand, hey, I was not trying to steal that. I was definitely trying to buy that. He's not listening. I can tell he's very angry. He's very upset. and I'm pretty sure, like I said, I'm gonna get in trouble. We get home, he tells me to go to my room. I hear him in the kitchen talking to my mom, and I'm pretty sure he's telling her that he's about to give me the whooping of a lifetime, basically. So when he comes into my room, I clench my butt cheeks to kind of prepare. But luckily he didn't do that. He said, "Hey, Stephen, come help me clean out the basement." So I say, "Okay." So I follow him down to the basement, and we're down there, and we have these two yellow Fisher Price toddler-sized chairs. And he sits me down on one chair, and he sits down on the other. And he says, "Stephen, there are two stories that I need to share with you here today." He says, "The first story is called The Birds and the Bees." And he says, "Well, Stephen, when a man and a woman fall in love, and he kind of starts to stutter. He's like, oh, and I'm like, where is this going?" And he eventually says, "Steve, all you need to know right now is when a man and a woman meet and fall in love, they fall in love and have a baby. You get that?" I said, "Okay, I got that." And then he told me the second story. He said, "Stephen, um, I want you to know that your mom made you with another man, but that man is not around anymore." He said, "When your mother met your father, one day they went to this bar, and there were some people there who didn't like seeing that they were together. They didn't like seeing a black man with a white woman. So some of the people there, they beat your father up, Stephen, and they ended up beating him up so bad that they killed him. And sometimes that stuff happens," he said. "But I want you to know that you're my son and I love you, and I'd never allow anything like that to happen to you. And if you ever find yourself in trouble, you just give me a call and I'll come get you out of that situation." Um, and that conversation, that experience, I mean, I still get emotional when I think about it. It's something that has taken me decades to process and fully sit with what that means, especially now as I have my own son. It's an interesting experience. Um, just to be aware of something that can disconnect a bond that should be that intimate. Now, the unfortunate reality is that I'm, of course, not the only one who has had a experience like that. Um, it's something that is very common in our nation's history, and it's something that happens repeatedly over and over again. We did some research before and after George Floyd was killed, and looking at the broadly the general mental health of Black and white Americans, but also how Black and white parents were talking with their children about this event. I want to share some data. Raise your hand if you're not a psychologist, just curious. Okay, so I try to make this as non-psych friendly as possible. There may be some stuff that doesn't make sense. You can ignore that. It's not that important. But this is a study looking at Gallup poll data. These are about 300,000 white and Black Americans across the United States. And we wanted to look at, we looked at depression, rates of depression and anxiety across these two populations. This is simply an effect size of how strong the change was before and after Floyd. Largely irrelevant given what I'm about to show you. But this is, again, change from before to after George Floyd. We find increases in depression and anxiety amongst white Americans, okay? And we find much higher, stronger changes in depression and anxiety amongst Black Americans. In fact, the estimate was at the time there were about 44 million Black Americans in the United States. And the estimate was that at least 1 million of those Black Americans qualified for clinical levels of depression as a result of this trauma. And the idea is the closer you are connected to this, if you see your identity represented in this, it hits you a bit harder. We also found that those in Minnesota, regardless of one's racial identity, were hit harder, had worse outcomes than those further away, okay? We also looked at, this is another study where we looked at parents, Black and white parents, and we just so happened to launch this survey 6 weeks before George Floyd was killed. looking at how parents are talking to their kids about race and racism. George Floyd was killed. We ended up just running the survey again a few weeks later to see what, if anything, had changed. And we find here, before Floyd, this was a question where we asked the parents, how worried are you that your child might be a target of racial bias? And how worried are you that your child might be racially biased? Okay, and we find that before Floyd, Black parents reported higher worry than white parents on fearing that their child would be a target of bias, and also in fearing that or being worried that their child would be biased. This is interesting. We could sit here and dissect this a lot. There's a lot here. I'm just gonna keep going, okay? After Floyd, same survey, we find Black parents more biased, no change in the white parents. Worry about their child being biased. Again, we find a slight increase in Black parents and no change in white parents, okay? We also asked them, how frequently do you talk to your child about race, racial inequality, and racial identity? Again, before pre-Floyd and post-Floyd. Interestingly, before Floyd, there were no differences, no self-reported differences between the Black and white parents. But after Floyd, we find again increases in Black parents, more likely now to talk about race, racial inequality, and racial identity, and no change in the white parents. If anything, the white parents became slightly less likely to talk about racial identity with their children post-Floyd. Now, these plots, these graphs don't capture the essence of what the conversations were like. We asked the parents who had reported that they were having conversations, well, what were you talking about with your child? I'm gonna give you two quotes, one from a Black parent talking to a 6-year-old child, and one from a white parent talking to their 6-year-old child, okay? To get a kind of the qualitative difference between what's happening in these contexts. This is a Black parent to their 6-year-old child. I told him about my godfather. He was driving and police shot the car up thinking it was stolen. They pulled him out of the car and beat his dead body. His story was never on the news. Okay. Now just imagine a 6-year-old. That's a lot. That's a lot. Okay. Perhaps necessary, but that's a lot. There's a white parent to their 6-year-old child. Everyone is treated equal. The color of your skin doesn't matter. Now I want to pause and acknowledge that although this could be a very well-intentioned message, this is what we would want. This is the reality we want to live in. It just isn't the world that we do in fact live in, okay? And the big point I want to make here is how Black children are aware of that from an earlier age, okay? Again, the reality is everyone is not treated equal. The color of your skin does in fact matter. For instance, Black Americans are 6 times more likely to be incarcerated than are white Americans. The median net wealth of Black families is $3,500 compared to nearly $150,000 for white families. There's huge consequences from this, okay? And even fresh out of the womb at birth, 1 in 90 Black infants die before they turn 1, compared to 1 in 250 white infants, okay? This is racism, this is racial inequality. There's a lot that goes into this reality. I'm going to return to this idea often throughout the talk. It's actually one of the key ideas behind the talk, of that when we think about racism, we think about individual bad, evil actors who do bad things. But we want to think about racism as a broader structure, a broader system of advantage based on race, a system in which some are advantaged and some are disadvantaged. There are many things that feed into the system, but it's important for us to keep this framework in mind that I'm going to return to. One advantage here is connected to the distinction between how Black children are learning about race compared to how white children are learning about race. It, from a very early age, shapes how these children view and see the world around them. I want to give one quick example. There's a study we ran a while ago. I think it's kind of funny, but it makes a point. And the point is, these was with, we started with 5 to 6-year-olds, and then we had some older children. And we'd show them a child like this. We'd say, hey, look at this kid here. When this kid grows up, which grown-up will he be? Will he be this grown-up or this grown-up? The idea is that the participant can make a same race or same skin color match, though admittedly, he is very red in the face right now, so probably not the best illustration of the, but they could make either a same race, different emotion match, or same emotion, different race match. And the idea is, do they attend more to the emotion or do they attend more to the skin color? And the basic finding here is you're going to see how often they made emotion-based matches in red and how often they made race-based matches in blue. They're technically the inverse of each other, but just for illustrative purposes, I have them both up there. For white 5 to 6-year-olds, we find that they were kind of at chance in the middle. They weren't sure, is it emotion or is it skin color, compared to white 9 to 10-year-olds and white adults who most often made race-based matches, okay? But these black 5 to 6-year-olds, same age as white 5 to 6-year-olds, were very likely, they already were starting to make these race-based matches, okay? And the main point here is that, and we find that these rates are predicted by how often their parents talk to them about race and racism, okay? So the basic idea is that from an earlier age, same age, these black children are attending to race in a way that these white 5 to 6-year-olds are not. Okay, under the guise of, hey, everyone is treated equal, the color of your skin doesn't matter. Okay. So we were really interested in my lab in recent years. We have been wanting to focus on how can we get white parents to have conversations about race and racism with their children, and how can they have productive conversations with race and racism with their kids. What's the vibe check right now? How's everyone doing? I'm trying to read the room. I'm having a hard time. Okay, cool. Okay. So I'm going to take a little bit of a weird random detour to talk about some broader psych concepts that are at the heart of the data that I'm going to show you. But I want to take a second to talk about what's known as attribution theory. And attribution theory is basically the idea that we humans, we are social creatures. We are constantly seeking ways, finding things that we can attribute someone's behavior to. Someone does something, well, what can we attribute that behavior to? What explains that behavior? What causes it? And under attribution theory, there are big two frameworks, ways in which humans often think about the world, or making these attributions. One is through these individual explanations, okay, by saying that the cause of a person's behavior is rooted in them as an individual, which we can contrast with situational explanations. Some might call them individual attributions or situational attributions. To make it a little more straightforward, I'm just going to call them explanations, okay? Situational explanations such that, well, maybe there's a situation or a structure that has caused the individual's behavior, okay? And one of the basic ideas in attribution theory is that we humans, we often default to these individual explanations. That's kind of our go-to. So as an example, I don't know what the traffic situation is like here, but I live in the Bay Area where the traffic is, it's just all madness all around. And many of you have maybe been in a situation where you're driving and someone speeds and cuts you off. What are some explanations? How would you explain that behavior? Let me open it up to, let me hear someone else's voice for a minute to give myself a break. How would you explain that? This person just is speeding, cut you off. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, you're obviously very sophisticated in thinking about my go-to, but that person's an asshole, maybe. What an inconsiderate jerk maniac. I should call the police. That's where we tend to go, but you are obviously elevated, so but we're less likely to think that, oh yeah, maybe that person has to go to the bathroom, maybe they're rushing to the emergency room, maybe there's a situation that causes that. We often default to individual explanations, okay? Very important point for the kind of rest of the talk. And when we think about racism, we often think about it from this lens of individual explanations. Here's a graph where the specifics are not that relevant given what I'm about to show you, but this is work done by a social psychologist at Chapel Hill. I think he may have moved, but these data were from 2010, where he looked at across different counties in the South, the strength of individual people's implicit anti-Black biases. There's a measure implicit association task, don't need to get into the specifics, but that essentially measures an individual person's bias against a variety of groups. In this case, it was an anti-Black bias, okay? Contrasted that with, here's another plot of the proportion of slaves, enslaved Black people in 1860 across those same regions. And he finds that 1860, that same proportion directly predicts the strength of implicit biases over a century later, okay? And the big argument that is, yeah, sure, there are individual biases, that's where we house them, but of course that's embedded in a broader historical, structural, situational context. And we have to be aware of this context and not only stop here, okay? Does that make sense? Okay, very important framework for as we go and start to talk about, well, what can children grasp and how should we talk about this stuff? I'm going to briefly talk about Derek Chauvin, who is the person who was convicted of murdering George Floyd. And let's think about his case now from an individual versus a situational perspective. I'm going to hopefully make it clear, I'm not a legal scholar, I'm not a moral philosopher. It is not my place to make a judgment on anything outside, anything. Yeah, I'll just leave it there. But as a psychologist, I'm interested in thinking about what might have explained his behavior. So from an individual point of view, one could say, well, Derek Chauvin, the racist, bad apple, hateful person who intentionally committed this horrible, horrible act. And what that does from a psychological perspective is it says that that act stems from the kind of person he is. The problem is within him. And what that does is it is intended to elicit high anger, low empathy for this individual. The inference is that this individual must be held responsible, and we must punish this person to make that person suffer and to deter others. The problem is within him, so that's where we now look for the solution, okay? And maybe the problem is within him. I'm not even irrelevant to the framework here. Contrast that with situational explanations, which might argue that, well, the act stems from forces around him, which might elicit lower anger, higher empathy for the person. Maybe a controversial thing to say, empathy for someone. Maybe the individual should not be held responsible. Maybe the person needs to be rehabilitated, and maybe we need to change the system to prevent those acts in the future, okay? Again, I'll say for the end of what's right or what's wrong is irrelevant. Very different frameworks that result in very different consequences, okay? And I do believe if I think about racism as a system of advantage that is rooted in a broader structural context, it is important to seek solutions at a broader structural systemic level. And when we think about how can we get kids to think about race and racism, our goal is to think, well, how can we get them to think about the broader forces that surround individuals? Not condoning the behavior in any way, not saying that the person should not be punished. I'm not a legal scholar, I'm not a moral philosopher, but how can we think about it in this broader context, okay? Now we spend some time, I'm still on my detour, I'm gonna come way back to children and race, huge detour. But one question from a psychological perspective, from a developmental psychological perspective is, when can children in fact grapple these larger or grasp these larger situational explanations? It's easy for us to think about individuals, but when developmentally are they ready to think about it from a broader structural point of view, okay? So we have some set of studies that are so abstract, you're gonna be like, where is this going right now? But just follow me, trust me, it's all gonna come together at the end. So we have this set of studies where we would show children, introduce them to two groups that we call, for now today, we'll call them Glerks and Hibbles. Sometimes they're the Tuludes and the Struffs. The name is always changing, but they're nonsensical groups. Say, hey, Glerks and Hibbles, and we tell them that the Glerks, for instance, they eat this kind of berry, the Hibbles eat this kind of berry, and then they'll see individuals who either eat the same kind of berry as their group or the different kind of berry as their group, okay? Now, from a child's perspective, a 5-year-old's perspective, this is not a good thing to do. This is bad. I'm going to show you a video clip of a specific child who just saw this scenario. Hopefully that will make the point. I didn't check the audio, so hopefully this works.
Look, this glurk is eating this kind of berry. Would you want to be friends with this glurk?
No. You would be way dumb.
Do you think other glurks like this glurk?
No. I hate gurks.
Do you think this glurk is good?
No, it's bad.
And do you think this is a bad glurk?
Then let's just kill him.
If you
I used to zoom in on his face and go, whoa, ho, 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 ho. But I stopped doing that. Okay, the point I want to make for young children, this is a very bad thing. And it's an idea about group boundaries and categories. They don't like it when people step outside of their category. But we ran another study where we then randomly assigned them to two conditions in which we tried to explain this behavior. For some of the kids, we said, oh, it's doing this because it likes to eat these berries. There's an individual explanation here. And for some, we said, well, it's doing this because the store was out of glurk berries. There's a situational constraint. And we want to see, will children override that negativity as a result of this new information, okay? And broadly, what you see here is those who receive that individual explanation. White bars are how often they said that the behavior was not okay. They condemned it, they judged it. When it's individual, they judge, it's bad. When it's situational, 5 to 6 year olds, they become more accepting of that behavior, okay? So this was an important study for us because it made clear that, hey, at 5 to 6, children can, take an act that they see as bad, have strong feelings for, but situational, individual information, we can use that to tweak how they think about it. I'm not saying that the goal is for them to think that what Derek Chauvin did was okay, that he should be forgiven. It's just that maybe they can use information, situational, individual, to change how they think about things that they see as bad, okay? Okay, big detour, okay, back, children, brace. We focus on white parents and their children. We focus on white parents who had children of 7 to 10-year-olds. Again, we established around 5 to 6, they're getting better at understanding these situational constraints. By 7 to 10, they should definitely have it. So let's focus on that age group. And this was started during COVID. So this was done online through Zoom. We would invite parents and a child into our, virtual lab. An experimenter would sit down with them and walk them through a very specific storybook, okay, about a specific situation that we wanted them to then talk about. I'll walk you through that storybook. This is Alex. He is 10 years old and lives in a town called Williamsville. Alex takes the school bus in the morning to get to school. At school, he learns new things. He eats lunch and plays outside. He's a regular kid. At the end of the day, he gets back on the school bus to go home. He's doing kid stuff. He's playing. All right. One day, Alex was riding the school bus home when he saw a big group of people protesting outside. They were chanting things, and Alex heard some of what they were chanting. He heard them chant things like Black Lives Matter and end police violence. Alex wondered, why are they chanting those things? When Alex got home, the television was on in the living room. The news was playing, and Alex saw the same protesters he had seen on his bus ride home. As Alex watched, a TV reporter interviewed one of the protesters in the group and said, "Why are you here?" she asked. I should also say a part of the motivation behind this was post-Floyd, height of Black Lives Matter, all these protests are going on. We thought that could be a very unique context conversation starter with children. So that's kind of why we went with this framework. So as Alex watched, a TV reporter interviewed one of the protesters in the group and said, asked, why are you here? We're protesting because a police officer in Williamsville beat up a black man, the protester said. It's the 6th time this year the Williamsville police have hurt a black person so badly that they had to go to the hospital, and I wanted to stop. Alex wanted to know more about what the protester said, so we asked his parents why the police in Williamsville kept hurting black people. Okay? At this point, the experimenter then says, please take a few minutes to have a conversation about the storybook we just read and Alex's question, okay? When you're done, send a message in the chat letting us know. The experimenter would walk away and the parents would just go for it. Very open-ended. We wanted to see what are they going to talk about, but also how are they going to explain this pattern of police violence, individually, structurally, okay? I'm going to show you a variety of conversations here to give you a flavor. I unfortunately can't make this bigger, but there will be subtitles here so you can hear it. Why do the police in Williamsville keep hurting Black people? Here's a parent speaking with their 10-year-old child.
Okay. So
Bad cops.
yeah, bad racist cops.
Racist cops.
Yeah, that was it. That was the end of the conversation. Right. That was it. Bad racist cops, end of story. Okay. Here's another example. This is an 8-year-old. Parent says, why do the police in Williamsville keep hurting Black people? Well, because they think they're bad. It's, this is the child. It's the white people are actually being bad and the Black people are being good. They are being hurt and the white people are pretending that the Black people hurt them, the parent. So they think they are better than the Black people because they have a different skin color. They are not like us. They don't deserve things like us. The child asks, but why? The parent, well, some people have this, it's called racism, when you differentiate between someone and someone, which is interesting. Yeah. Okay, and they think they should be lower class people. They don't get to live at the same level of us. It's good, they're engaging, they're having a conversation, but there's a clear framework that's being emphasized here. So there's this thing called racism when you differentiate people, and some people have this. The problem is within the people, okay? Here's another conversation. This is with an 8-year-old and their parent.
Nothing's wrong with having darker skin.
Yeah, but sometimes the government can be set up in such a way because of racism in the past. It can be set up in a way that hurts Black people, like neighborhoods that have more Black people living there. Sometimes the police are there more often, and then the police might have some racist actions, and then they end up hurting Black people disproportionately.
One thing I like to point out for that explanation is, obviously it's more of a situational, structural explanation. It's also longer and more involved, which is sometimes a challenge of the situational, bad racist cops, it's easy, quick. How do you talk about centuries of systems? It's a huge thing, but the parent here is engaging. Here's another transcript. This is with a 9-year-old child. Why do the police in Williamsville keep hurting Black people? Child, oh, because racist. Parent, they could be racist, yeah. Why else? Encouraging, deeper thinking. Maybe their parent didn't grow up liking Black people. And this is great because, again, it's just encouraging the child. Just go one step further. Well, what explained that thing? We don't just stop there. What explained that thing? Maybe their parent didn't grow up liking Black people, the child said. Parent, maybe their parents taught them those things. Yeah. Parent, yeah, maybe sometimes we have prejudices against people without even realizing it. So this is an interesting one, and I'll talk about this more in a bit, but they're talking about individual and situational. They're both there. It's a combination of the two. They go hand in hand, but getting that child to think about deeper causes. So overall, there's a lot that was in this study. I'm taking out a very small snippet, but key thing I wanted to emphasize here is this data point. During the conversation, what explanations did parents and their children give for why the police keep hurting Black people? And here you're going to see frequency of individual explanations and then situational explanations. This is given by the parents, okay? We see most of them were individual focused, about 40% of them didn't even really answer the question of why was it so. It was interesting dodgery happening, but of those who did answer, the majority gave individual explanations, and the same was the case for the children. Now, of course, this doesn't account for the fact that they were having this conversation together, and what the parent said, the child could have repeated. Like, they go hand in hand. This wasn't an experiment, but individual explanations were most common. We also then at the end gave the children, after the experimenter came back and they had their conversation, we showed them different potential explanations. So, well, here's some things that other people think of why this might be the case. Now, some people think it's because the police officers are mean and just don't like police officers. Another example is, some people think because the police officers watched movies and read books where Black people were always the criminals. And then we asked the children, do you think this is a good explanation or a bad explanation? And we find that overall, the individual explanation was rated as that's the better explanation, which of course makes sense given the conversations that they just had. Okay, does this make sense? Everyone following along? Okay, so that was just a very open-ended step one of what were they talking about in this very specific context where we gave them a storybook and we're trying to scaffold the conversation. But then we wanted to see, well, okay, the finding was that individual explanations were more frequent than the situational explanations and favored over the situational explanations. But what if we could reverse that and create a context where the children were in fact getting situational explanations? Would that change how they think about the problem? And perhaps more importantly, would that change the solutions that they would now seek out? Okay, if we asked them, well, how would you fix this? Would giving them these explanations change what they would otherwise say? Did I in the beginning when I gave this when I started with my disclaimers, did I say that this talk is going to end on a very anticlimactic note? Did I say that? No? Okay. Okay, so that's basically going to happen. So it was the same exact study. Alex, the story ended here. Alex wanted to know more about what the protester said, so he asked his parent why the police in Williamsville kept hurting the police. And this time, the children, they were again 7 to 13-year-olds, they were randomly assigned to one of two conditions in which the parent, Alex's parent, came and basically answered the question, okay? And for some of the kids, they heard the parent say, well, I think some of the police officers in the department are racist against Black people, which means they don't like Black people. Because of that, they treat Black people differently and are more rough with them. Other children were in another condition where the parent came in and said, well, people might hear racist messages that aren't true about Black people being bad guys and criminals. They might see these messages in movies or on the news, and that might make them think that Black people are bad. Again, completely acknowledging the point that when we think about these situational explanations, this is one that is focusing on media and representation of images. We're going to have many, there are others. That's just one that we thought might be easier for children to grasp, okay? This is where it gets a little underwhelming. I assume that we would have all the data by this point, but life happens, and this 6-month-old is really taking up a lot of my time. But I have some preliminary data here that I wanted to share, where we, after they are given the explanations, and we asked the children, well, what could be done so that the police could stop hurting Black people? Some solutions that the children in the individual condition generated were things like, oh, well, we can confront the police officers who hurt Black people. We can tell them that if they don't stop, they'll be fired. They're not bad ideas, but they're targeting individuals, okay? And here we find that in that condition so far, about 67% of them provide individual-based solutions, okay? And only 7% of them think about structural solutions, okay? When we contrast that with those in the situational condition, they say things like, well, you could post things on YouTube that say that Black people are just as fair, or you could change how the city operates. Someone needs to change the rules. They're thinking a bit more broadly about it. And there we find that individual solutions drops to 26%. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. We can have a conversation about that. And 19% of them provide structural solutions, which seems so small and so tiny. But if we compare that to this individual condition, it almost triples that rate. And if we know that children are most often getting these individual explanations, suggests that at least coupling that or pairing that with situational explanations can increase the rate at which they seek out situational solutions. Okay. So this is the part where I'm going to try to wind down and think of some really big, amazing words of wisdom to end on a big bang note. Individual explanations, situational explanations. We find that around 5 to 6 children are capable of at least thinking about it in this framework. And in the context of police violence specifically, there's some promising evidence that having this specific conversation in that specific context could yield benefits. Some of the key points that I hope you take away with here are that Black parents are out of necessity more likely than white parents to speak with their children about race and racism. That when white parents do speak about race, they often send colorblind messages. The idea that, hey, everyone's treated equal, the color of your skin doesn't matter. Okay. When they do speak about racism, white parents often focus on these individual-based, individual-level explanations. There's some ongoing work, and this is work in other labs as well, that at least including structural explanations within those conversations can perhaps help them seek out structural solutions. It's a very cheesy and very corny metaphor, but when we think about this idea of bad apples, we don't only want to focus on the individual apple. We want to have a conversation about the context in which those apples are produced. And children, those might be fruitful conversations for children. The last thing I'll say is, this is a picture of my son. As a developmental psychologist, you learn the way to either begin or end a talk. You add a picture of a baby in there. Nothing else matters. But this is my son, and his mom is Vietnamese and Korean, and I'm Black and white. So he's going to have a very interesting racial socialization and experiences, but I will for sure have many conversations about both individual problems and structural and situational problems with him. And I hope that when he grows up and has and goes to school, that he finds himself in a classroom with peers of different identities who have also had conversations about situational problems, and that his white friends and white peers are thinking about those issues as well. So he doesn't only kind of experience the blunt of that. And I'm sure that I'm in a room of like-minded people who will help work on that important stuff. So that's kind of it. So thank you. Oh, so sorry, you're going to take over?
No, thank you
Okay.
so much. And I'm really pleased to see that you're already mastering the dad joke.
Oh, wow, that's offensive. I thought those were just jokes.
Okay, so we've got a few moments for Q&A, and I'm going to start with a question that was submitted during the registration, and then while Stephen's addressing that, then Anna will come around. And so if you have a question, raise your hand and Anna will rush over to you with the microphone. Okay, so the first question was one that someone submitted online when they registered. And I thought it was a great question too, because, you know, as parents, we like to think that we have an overwhelming influence on our children, but then they go to school, they have friends. And so the question was, you know, what do we do about peers? You know, what's the role of peers in developing, you know, these ideas?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I'm sure I'll preface many of these questions with, so fortunately outside of my area, and I should know the more of the literature on that. So we focus And many of the studies that focus on conversation with children about race and racism do focus on parents, but any developmentalists in the know that peers play a huge, massive role in the socialization of their children, and they will have conversations often more explicit and brutal and damaging that parents won't have. So the only literature that I know, and I welcome anyone to speak if they know better than I, on the role of peers in racial socialization and racial identity, is that when children enter elementary school and middle school, their peers play a very important role in strengthening or shaping the strength of their racial identity. And if, for instance, if we think about it from the perspective of children of color, there's a lot of great work on how children of color who go to school in predominantly white contexts, I mean, it's so intuitive, but they're just going to have completely different experiences than those in more diverse contexts. There's a really cool, interesting study done by Melanie Killen, who's at the University of Maryland, and she looked at children's perceptions of racial dynamics. And she had a group of children who were in a non-diverse school and children who were in a diverse school. And what she would do is she would show the children the scenario, same scenario, but she would reverse it. It would be in one scenario, it would be a white child a white student standing behind a black student who was on the ground, kind of reaching for books. And these ambiguous scenarios. She would ask the children, "Hey, what's going on here? What do you think happened?" And there was another version where the person standing was black and the person on the floor was white. What's going on here? And there are a lot of interesting findings, but one of the key findings was that the children in the non-diverse context, the white children in the non-diverse context, they were more pessimistic and negative when the person standing was black. Oh, that person pushed him or attacked him. Whereas when the person standing was white, they're like, oh, he's about to help him pick up his books. Whereas the children, white and children of color from the diverse context, they didn't treat the two scenarios differently. So one conclusion from that study is that from the child of color's perspective, if they are in a context in which they are a minority, they're going to have a whole different set of expectations and assumptions that will shape how they see themselves and how they navigate that setting. I hope that's kind of useful.
Thank you. I had a question regarding the finding of the responses that children gave in the situational condition, because I noticed that the total amount of solutions offered was lower. And so I'm wondering if their responses just weren't codable in that
Great.
dynamic.
Great.
Yeah.
Sorry. And I should have mentioned that. So thank you for pointing that out. So you'll see that for those of you who didn't catch that, first of all, here overall, there were fewer solutions provided if you tally these compared to here. And two things. So, one of the big drivers here, unfortunately, there were more children in this condition who kind of said, I don't know what to do. And that kind of makes sense if you think about, if you say, hey, there's this bigger situational problem that from a child's perspective, they're like, that seems harder and bigger, and I don't know if I even can do anything. So we did find there was a bigger group of children who just kind of said, I don't know what to do. And that can, in part, be one of the reasons why individual solutions or explanation can be very appealing. It's a very easy solution. Throw them in jail, something like that, So that's something that we need to think about of how can you present a situational explanation that isn't completely overwhelming or doesn't seem too large. At the same time, though, we did get hope that at least we were able to increase this to an extent. And the question is just how can we get this even higher and kind of bring those other children along? But I should have mentioned that. It's a great point. And I thank you for stopping me to make that clear.
Is there any idea that you might have for studying parents of their like the parents' solution to individual versus situational attribution and how that affects the kid saying I don't know kind of to the situational, because I feel like just observationally, not even in a study, it's like a lot of people don't really know when it comes to bigger problems. So if the parent socialization or like the mentor figure doesn't know what to do, that definitely impacts the socialization towards the child who
That's a
is
really,
following
yeah,
them.
it's a
So
great idea and a great point. And, you know, we thought, at least in this situational condition, we're going to give them something so concrete and tangible. There are bad images out there. Change the images. But even that backfired. But yeah, if children see even their parent have a similar response of, oh, there's a situational structure and I don't know, the government, history, big words, that could get the child to not only kind of adopt a similar mentality, but maybe even just say, you know what, I'm just going to stop at these individual. So, and what I also hear in that maybe there's another opportunity for an intervention there where if the parent can be seen modeling or generating a easy, tractable situational solution, that the child might then be more motivated or inspired to do that as well. That's an amazing idea. Yeah.
I wanted to give two pieces of context about myself. One, I'm in public health and not psychology.
Okay.
So I don't know much about developmental psychology, but
neither.
and that two, so I'm a child of two immigrant parents from the Middle East, from Iran. And I feel like to this day, at 22 years old, I'm still trying to like make them aware of moments where they may face racism, but they don't know that they do, or they don't think that they do, coming from a country where everyone looks like them, and then into one where they might experience racism and that they do. I'm curious if like parents of young children that are immigrants or come from a background of like a country where racism is not as prevalent or you don't see it as much or they don't experience it as much, what those conversations, like what you think those would look like with their kids to be like, hey, like what is happening in this situation? And like I think when I was growing up, my parents never gave me a race talk, but I think it's because they never got one.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious what you think that would
That's
look
really
like.
interesting. I don't know of any research on that, so I'm going to start by giving the most connected literature that I can think of, and then I'll give you an anecdote. So maybe you're familiar with this literature on, like, I think it's called the immigrant paradox, where I think and I don't know how this work is perceived in today's, it's been a while since I revisited it. So, but the basic finding is that immigrants, often the first generation, is more successful economically than the second generation. And typically that's couched within the idea of like embracing the American dream and all that stuff. And that maybe it fades by the second generation. But maybe a part of it is also paired with that oh, I don't experience racism, I'm not here, I don't get that, so I'm just going to keep going. Where then in the second generation, it's like, hey, do you not see what is happening here? You know, the second generation is now more familiar with the context. So I could see that being something. Okay, anecdote. So my dad, the guy who spoke to me about racism, he technically was an immigrant. He was from Guyana in the Caribbean originally, and my grandmother similarly. What are you talking about? There's no racism. It's like, have you seen what is happening to you and everyone? And she never had that conversation with my dad. My dad's had very different conversations with me, because he was raised in this context and he didn't come in from another place where he was where my grandmother, maybe your parents, psychologically, maybe it was in their best interest to not even go there and think, hey, the door is wide open. Whereas later it gets a little different. But I know of no empirical data on that. So everything I just said could be way off. But it's interesting. But you're on it. Is that what you're working on? Oh, yeah. Okay, but that's a great question. Great insight. Yeah.
Okay, this will be the last question. And this was one submitted through Zoom, and feel free to keep it short. It's someone wanted to know if there are any children's books, and I'll just expand it to any resources that you might want to share to recommend to parents and families to help facilitate these conversations.
Yeah. So I was made aware of an amazing book this morning during our class visit in the counseling site class. I had no idea that this existed. I think one of the best books on racism. I think the two best books on the situation and all the stuff going in the situation are Cast by Isabel Wilkerson and Stamped by Ibram X. Kendi. Stamped is just like, as a historical document, there's so much, like, it's like, it might as well be called The Situation in 1,000 pages. How do you explain that to a kid? But apparently there's a children's book version of Stamped designed for young children that condenses those ideas. I haven't visited it. I haven't read that, but I want to get a copy, and I can imagine that if that's successful at condensing those complicated ideas into a child format, that would be incredible. So yeah. Hey, good luck, everyone. Thank you for listening. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.